My boss fired me for budget cuts. A smug, self-satisfied smirk plastered across his face as he did it. He thought he was just getting rid of a pricey employee, a line item on a spreadsheet. What he didn't grasp, what his entire arrogant worldview couldn't possibly compute, was that the $50,000 custom-built system keeping his multi-million-dollar company afloat was my personal property. This is the story of how I followed his final, condescending instructions to the letter, took back my equipment, and watched the company that betrayed me crumble into dust. For 5 years, I was the lead systems architect at a mid-sized logistics company. When I started, to call the place a technical mess would be a kindness. It was a digital stone age. They were trying to manage a complex, national shipping operation using a chaotic patchwork of outdated spreadsheets, frantic email chains, and pure, unfiltered guesswork. Drivers were regularly sent to the wrong state. Client orders would vanish into a digital black hole for weeks, and the invoicing department was a manual, paper-driven nightmare that was always months behind. The company wasn't just inefficient, it was actively bleeding money from 1,000 tiny cuts. Seeing this relentless, expensive chaos, I went to my boss, let's call him Gary, and proposed a unified, automated solution. A central nervous system that would handle everything from real-time vehicle dispatch and client inventory tracking to instant, automated invoicing. Gary's eyes lit up at the idea of boosting profits, but the moment I showed him the budget, his face soured. He balked at every line item. He wouldn't pay for the dedicated servers, the specialized software licenses, or even classify my development time as work. I was young, ambitious, and so profoundly sure that my system would revolutionize the company that I made him a deal he couldn't refuse. I'd build the entire system on my own time, after hours and on weekends, using my own high-performance equipment. The company wouldn't have to pay a single dime for the hardware, the infrastructure, or the thousands of hours of my life it would consume. He just stared at me for a second, a glint in his eye that I now recognize as pure greed. He saw free work and zero risk and agreed instantly, shaking my hand with a grin. Now I have to be crystal clear. This was a colossal mistake on his part, and it created an incredibly unusual legal situation. In most jobs, anything you create for the company, even on your own time or with your own resources, belongs to the company under a legal principle known as the work-for-hire doctrine. Your employer owns your professional output, period. But Gary's explicit verbal agreement to have me use my own gear for the project, combined with the meticulous records I kept of every purchase and every hour worked, put me in a very rare and very powerful position. Over the next 2 years, I poured my life into building the company's entire operational backbone. The core of it was a high-performance, fault-tolerant RAID array that I purchased for about $6,000. I still have the original PDF invoices with serial numbers saved in my cloud storage. This wasn't just a fancy external hard drive. It was a fortress for data that held the live, constantly updating database and all the custom automation scripts that made the magic happen. The software was a highly specialized logistics management suite with a perpetual license that I bought for another $5,000 on my personal credit card, registered under my personal email address. But the real investment, the one that can't be itemized on a receipt, was my time. I poured over 2,000 hours of my personal time, evenings, weekends, holidays, into writing hundreds of thousands of lines of custom code. That code lived in a private GitHub repository under my personal account, an account Gary never even asked for access to. Factoring in the top-of-the-line hardware, the perpetual software license, and a conservative rate for my skilled labor, the system was easily worth over $50,000. And because of our specific, boneheaded verbal agreement, every last bit of it was legally mine. The system was a staggering success. It didn't just work, it transformed the business. Operational errors, like lost shipments and incorrect invoices, were slashed by over 90%. Profits soared. Gary, of course, took all the credit in company-wide meetings and client-facing presentations. I was the ghost in the machine, the only person on earth who knew how it all worked, and I quietly kept it humming along from my corner of the office. Things went south about a month ago. During a walkthrough, I noticed some severe safety issues in the warehouse pallets double-stacked on shelves not rated for the weight, critical fire exits consistently blocked by loose inventory. These weren't minor infractions, they were accidents waiting to happen. I documented them with my phone and filed a formal, written safety complaint with both HR and Gary. He was absolutely furious that I had created a paper trail. He pulled me into a side office and hissed at me that I wasn't a team player and that I needed to be more concerned with productivity than making problems. I know now that's the exact moment he decided to get rid of me. A few weeks later, he called me into his office. He had that same smug, self-satisfied look on his face from the day I'd offered to build his company for free. "We're making some structural changes," he said, barely containing his glee. "Due to necessary budget cuts, we've decided to eliminate your position, effective immediately." Budget cuts was an insulting lie. The company was more profitable than it had ever been in its history, a direct result of the system I built and maintained. As he slid a pathetic, empty cardboard box across his polished mahogany desk, I glanced out his office window. Standing in the lobby, dressed in an ill-fitting suit, was his nephew, a fresh-faced college grad with a business degree and zero tech experience waiting to be welcomed aboard. So much for budget cuts. He handed me the termination packet, his finger tapping condescendingly on one particular line in the exit checklist. "As you pack up your desk," he said, locking eyes with me, "be sure to only take your personal property." He wasn't just firing me. He was trying to humiliate me, to rub my face in it. But in that moment of supreme arrogance, his own words handed me the keys to the kingdom. A slow smile spread across my face. I just nodded and said, "Understood." I will be sure to follow that instruction perfectly. I didn't argue. I didn't make a scene. I went back to my desk and began to follow his instructions with meticulous precision. My immediate coworkers watched, a few of them looking nervous, knowing just how deeply my personal hardware was integrated into the company's daily functions. First, I unplugged my ergonomic keyboard and my dual monitors into the box. Then, I knelt down beside my desk and carefully, deliberately disconnected the power and data cables from my external array, the one with the serial number that matched the invoice filed away safely at my house. The one that held the living, breathing brain of the entire company. I picked it up, feeling its significant weight, and placed it carefully into the box. Next, I pulled out my phone, opened my password manager, and logged into the software vendor's web portal. I navigated to the My Licenses page. There it was, the $5,000 perpetual license, registered to my name and my personal email. With a single, satisfying tap, I clicked Deactivate. The software was still physically installed on their servers, of course, but without an active license key, it was now just millions of lines of useless, inert code. A project manager, one of the few people who had a vague sense of the system's architecture, rushed over, his face pale with panic. "What are you doing?" He whispered, his eyes wide. "You can't take that." The whole system, the client portal, everything runs on it. I didn't raise my voice. I simply gestured my head toward Gary's glass-walled office, where he was now laughing and shaking his nephew's hand. "Gary just gave me a direct order," I said calmly. "He instructed me to take all of my personal property. This is my property, so that's what I'm doing." I taped a box shut, the company's heart now packed away next to my favorite coffee mug, and my desk lamp, and began my final walk toward the exit. Gary was still celebrating with his nephew as I passed. He glanced at the box under my arm, gave me one last dismissive smirk, and turned away, never for a second suspecting that he just personally authorized and witnessed the complete dismantling of his own company. I hadn't even been home for an hour when my phone exploded. The first call was from the panicked project manager. "The client portal is down. It's giving a license error." Drivers can't see their routes. The reading algorithm isn't processing. What's going on? I calmly informed him that since I was no longer an employee, I was not in a position to provide technical support. I wished him the best of luck. An hour after that, Gary himself called, his voice no longer smug, but a distorted shriek of pure rage. You sabotaged the system. You stole company property. I'm going to see you. I'm going to have you arrested. You'll never work in this industry again. I let him scream until he was out of breath. Then, in the most placid, professional tone I could muster, I replied, Gary, I did exactly what you told me to do. I removed my personal property. The hardware array, which I have the receipts for, is mine. The software license, which is registered to my name and paid for by my credit card, is mine. You built your entire multi-million-dollar business on borrowed equipment, and per your instructions, I just took it home. There was a long, stunned silence on the other end of the line, filled only by his heavy breathing. But the entire company runs on that. He finally stammered, I'm aware, I said. It's a shame you didn't value it. However, I'm available to provide my services as an independent consultant to help you resolve your issues. My emergency rate is $500 an hour with a 40-hour minimum retainer, which comes to $20,000 paid up front. Naturally, my attorney will need to draft and review the contract first. He screamed a few more profanities and hung up on me. I later heard from a former coworker that he immediately hired an expensive, big-name IT consulting firm. They were on site for less than a day before they delivered a grim assessment. Without the physical RAID array, the live database and all of my custom logic were simply gone. You would think a company this dependent on data would have robust, off-site backups, but that was another corner Gary had cut to save a few bucks. Their backups were just weekly snapshots of the server's operating system, not the data on my external array. To make matters infinitely worse, they discovered that all of my development work, all the source code, was in my private, secure GitHub repository. The company had no copy of the code that ran their business. The consultant's verdict was brutal. It would take a team of developers at least 6 months and well over $100,000 to even attempt to rebuild a functional equivalent from scratch. The company didn't have 6 months in logistics. It didn't even have 6 days. Within 3 days of the system going dark, their 5 biggest clients, whose contracts represented nearly 70% of the company's revenue, had pulled their multi-million-dollar accounts. With no system to process new orders, track shipments, or send invoices, their cash flow froze solid. By the end of the second week, they had to lay off the entire operational staff. From the warehouse floor to the accounting department, Gary called one last time. The rage was gone, replaced by a pathetic, broken whimper. He begged. He offered me my job back, a huge raise, EVP title, anything. I politely and very happily declined. 3 weeks after I was fired, the company officially filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy total liquidation. The doors were chained, the assets were sold for pennies on the dollar, and the business that Gary had built on my back ceased to exist. But that's not quite the end of the story. The very same day I was fired, I called an employment lawyer. My case for wrongful termination was ironclad. Firing an employee as a direct result of them making a documented safety complaint is textbook illegal retaliation. The fact that he hired his unqualified nephew on the very same day was the nail in the coffin. Faced with a mountain of evidence, the company's insurance provider quickly settled with me for a very comfortable 6-figure sum. I used that settlement money as seed capital to start my own logistics and systems consulting firm. And in the final, most delicious twist, I ended up signing 3 of my former company's 5 biggest clients. They were furious at Gary, left in the lurch, and desperate for a stable solution. I moved them over to a new and improved version of the system this time, hosted on my own professional grade, fully redundant servers under a proper, legally sound service agreement. Now, let me be crystal clear. My situation was a perfect storm of foolishness and foresight. I had an unbelievably arrogant boss, a specific and unusual verbal agreement, and meticulous, undeniable records of personal ownership. In 99.9% of cases, the work-for-hire doctrine stands. Your employer owns what you create on the job. Taking company property, even if you feel it's yours, can result in severe legal and criminal consequences. This isn't advice. It's a cautionary tale about what can happen in the rarest of circumstances. In the end, Gary's greed and arrogance cost him everything. His fundamental mistake was failing to understand the critical difference between an employee's salary and their actual value. He thought of me as a cost to be minimized rather than an asset to be valued. He built a glass empire on a foundation that I owned, and then he forgot or simply never cared that I had every legal right to take it with me when he pushed me out the door.